Hey, Beau! How do we know that we are different than the people that surround us? And is that even possible?
So it's a reason why I chose this question, and thank you everyone for sending all the questions in after my Instagram post. There's some fascinating ones there, and I'll try to get through many of them. And I chose this one because I think that sense of feeling not normal, feeling on the outside, is something that we all feel. I know I feel it. I feel it all the time, and I wonder if there's anyone who ever doesn't feel that they're on the outside of something, whether it be their family, their friends, at work. So we all have that sense of feeling on the outside, and can be a very powerful and even negative feeling because of course, your brain evolved to want to belong. Because during evolution, if you weren't part of a group, the probability of death actually increased, and so one of the strongest feelings we can have is not being part of something. Um, and so, on the one hand, on the other hand, there's so you could argue that being social is not a choice. That's actually a default setting for us, which suggests that actually uh, um, you could argue maybe far more interesting and courageous is to not be part of something. Joseph Campbell, the wonderful comparative theologist, I was a theology minor at Berkeley many, many years ago, and Houston Smith was one of my instructors. And he and Joseph Campbell makes the point that maybe to choose not to be part of the group is actually a far more, in some sense, a more evidence of a free will. Being part of a group is no choice at all. To not be part of a group is more of a evidence of making a choice. Uh, and also, when thinking about normal, if you think about normal, mathematically, the norm is not dissimilar to the average. They're not exactly the same, but they're not similar. So, to strive for normal is, in some sense, to strive to be average. And why would you want to strive to be average? Because think about it. Nothing. Have you ever seen an average hero? Nothing interesting really happens in the average. Um, and what defines you is often what is not overlapping with everyone else. If you think about a Venn diagram, where you have things that overlaps, you have all these different things. Take a woman or a man, or just an individual person, right? You meet them, and when you first meet them, you're thinking about, you're engaging with them according to your history of experience with a woman, a man, in work, whatever it might be, um, and you're engaging with them as normal, as average, but but imagine you carried on your relationship with them as if they were average. To do so wouldn't actually understand who they are, because who another person is the part that deviates from average, hence the title of my book, To Deviate. That's actually the bits that don't overlap with everybody else are really, in some sense, the parts that define you. Uh, and that sort of so in that sense, we're all, what defines us is in fact the bit that is abnormal, the bits that don't overlap, the bits that starts outside. Uh, so it's that this gets then into thinking about identity. And isn't it interesting that when we think about identity, so often we reduce our identities, um, we simplify, we define ourselves by a single thing, and yet we don't like it when someone reduces us to a single thing. One of the easiest ways to insult someone is to say, you are this one thing, when in fact, no one is a single thing. We are complex, we are contextual, and also can be very complicated. Complicated people can be very sort of high maintenance, but complex people who are many things but are integrated across those many things can actually be far more adaptable. Um, and so when we think about that Venn diagram in some sense, if if you are a more complex person, that means you have the potential of being part of multiple groups, multiple identities. And in order to do so, you can't really be at the center of any one of them. Okay? You need to be actually, in a way, on the periphery of each of those groups. Because if you're on the periphery of each of those groups, it makes me want to draw a picture here, which I've never done before. But let's say, here's a group here. And if if you're on the periphery here, now it means that you can actually be part of another group and another group and another group. Okay, so you can actually be part of multiple groups simultaneously. Uh, and in doing so, that makes you a more complex, I'd argue, higher dimensional being. Uh, and I don't mean that in a sort of a spiritual sense. What I mean that is almost in a literal sense. That at any point in time, you have more degrees of freedom from which to move. That can actually help you to be a much more adaptable person. Um, and so when I see people reducing their identity and tightening the box that they're in, for instance, you'll experience this a lot when you suggest something to someone, and they'll say, "Oh, that's just not me. That's not who I am." And I find that, in some sense, quite interesting. That in that very moment, they've actually reduced the potential of who they are, as opposed to engaging with the possibility that they could expand themselves. Um, and often we find that the more complex a person, the more humble they become. We actually did an experiment on this, and we're actually going to release this on the Lab of Misfits website. That when we ask people who are they, and they answer the question to multiple people, they realize that actually they are contextual. There are many people. And in doing so, that actually increase their humility. The beauty of humility is that it's the engine of evolution. It makes you more open to new experiences, new people, but also the openness that I'm particularly interested in is the openness to let go of the thought of the things that you thought to be true before. Uh, and yet, when we tighten that identity, we reduce these possibilities, we simplify ourselves. It's what's we actually, interestingly, can actually decrease our humility. We become more certain, right? More dogmatic. Um, and I often see this with people where they will become very, very certain in their opinion. This is the way it is. This is the way I do it, and therefore they project it onto the world that this is the way it must be done. Their truth is the truth. Uh, and often this is a consequence of fear of uncertainty, which is the greatest fear your brain has. And one way of dealing with that fear of uncertainty is to be certain about what you believe without question, and to not be questioned. And when you're questioned, you go immediately to defense and to argument, to aggression. Um, so there's some recent research showing that the more, the less someone knows about something, often the more certain they become about it, the more confident they become of their view. And what they've really done is they've decreased their space of possibility. They've decreased the possibility of their identity being more complex, and therefore they've decreased their adaptability. They become very fragile, both emotionally and physically, which decreases their well-being, decreases their humility. So, are you on the outside? Yeah, right? Probably. Um, does it matter? Yes, it matters, because um, the courage is being able to be in multiple contexts and to be able to adapt to these different contexts and to find beauty in these different areas, and to have the courage to actually question who you think you are. And in doing so, to complexify yourself, which enables you to be part of multiple groups, a more interesting, beautiful, dynamic identity. So, thank you for the question.